I am a big fan of the Avatar series. I have been for as long as I can remember. And while I love Aang's story, nothing will ever compare to my adoration of Korra. Like, I've kept up with the entirety of Korra for as long as it's been a thing, and maybe have all the DVDs and comics. And I will be honest, I have a tendency to rewatch the show, or at the very least books 3 and 4, every couple of years. I may or may not be rewatching even the slightly more cringe seasons while writing this script, which is why when I learned that there's a Korra Fire Emblem game, I had to look further into it. Now, for those of you who know Avatar, you may be aware of how poorly the IP has been handled by Nick all throughout its existence. With The Last Airbender, they never really set up a good airtime for episodes, and reruns were basically non-existent unless you got lucky. That's not even mentioning how poorly they handled Korra. Being a Korra fan sucked when they suddenly switched the airing of episodes to Nick.com, not to mention when they suddenly dropped Book 4 with basically no fanfare. I only caught it on time thanks to word of mouth. This treatment was extended tenfold to video games. From what I can tell, the licensed games tended to be rushed, given short deadlines to try and release in time for the holiday season. What interests me about this whole situation, though, is that The Last Airbender got quite a few console games and continues to get them even now. However, Korra only got 2 games, both releasing only a week apart, and there hasn't been another Korra game since. It's kind of sad that Korra only got 1 chance while Aang continues to get second chances. As for accessibility of games, well, the first one got delisted 3 years after release, so it's not possible to obtain anymore. But this one is still possible to find brand new copies of. No, I didn't pay $30-something for a physical copy of this, but my friend did because they enjoy seeing me suffer. So, now that we know Avatar games tend to suck, how does The Legend of Korra, A New Era Begins, fare? Well, it's not a good game, but it's also not bad. I know that might sound kind of weird, but it's hard to really explain the experience that is this game. I guess we can start with the basics. A New Era Begins is a turn-based strategy game that takes place between the events of books 2 and 3. Now, in terms of story, I wouldn't say there's much to talk about there. Between each chapter, there are essentially 5 lines of dialogue. All that really matters is the game involves Korra losing her bending before slowly relearning all of her skills to take down the big bad of the game. It's simple enough, and I'm actually kind of glad the story is non-existent. By avoiding the impossible task of creating a brand new, enticing story in whatever time crunch the devs suffered, it means they could spend more time on actual gameplay. And, I don't want to know what the game would have been like otherwise. As for the actual gameplay, we have a variety of units available to us with their own sets of skills. We start off with Korra, Mako, and Bolin. 75% of Team Avatar. And like with Fire Emblem, we have a weapon triangle, or in this case, a weapon square. Water beats fire, fire beats air beats earth, and earth beats water. Oh, and then there are physical or non-bender attacks. Earthbenders are also weak to non-benders. Now, this seems a bit weird at first. Why are non-benders strong against earthbenders specifically? And I was confused for a bit, until I remembered that this takes place before the appearance of the new Air Nation. The only fully realized airbenders are Korra and Tenzin, both people who are allied units. As such, we obviously need to give Bolin a weakness. Though this also creates a secondary problem of Mako being a firebender and there are no airbenders for him to take down. However, they did a few slight workarounds to help fix this issue. The first of these workarounds that we run into is how Mako has a much higher power stat than any of our other party members. This helps immensely as the weapon triangle here seems to have an impact on damage done. As such, if I use an ineffective attack on someone, it'll usually do around 3 damage. Mako, however, rarely runs into this issue. No matter what kind of advantage he does or doesn't have, his power is so high he'll usually deal massive damage. This makes him especially invaluable during chapters where Korra has no bending. I found him doing so much damage that he had a tendency to one-hit opponents. However, this ignores another aspect of the weapon triangle in this game. Every unit has 2 health stats. They have HP and shields. HP is the same as usual. Reach 0 and you're knocked out. Shields protect you from taking HP damage, but if you have the elemental advantage, your attack will ignore the unit's shields and do direct damage to HP. These shields become an issue as you get farther along in the game, seeing as Mako will have to slowly chip away at enemy shields before doing damage. And by the way, attacks always do exactly 1 damage to shields unless you get a critical. There is one balancing decision that was made in order to make Mako more useful later on in the game. And that's that non-benders will have their own elemental weaknesses. So there will be some enemies that Mako has an elemental advantage over, and there end up being lots of non-benders later on in the game. However, lots of non-benders means lots of enemies that can ignore Bolin's shields, which puts him in a ton of danger, but they actually did something to help with that too, and that has to do with what each class all the characters are. Now, since I'm a Fire Emblem YouTuber, sort of, I'll talk about the characters we get in terms of our usual Fire Emblem classes. Now, Korra is obviously our Lord-type class. She has heavily balanced stats and access to all 4 of the elements. As for the Bending brothers we start off with, Mako is our archer. He has high damage, a decent crit rate, and automatically starts with only ranged attacks. Bolin is our knight. High defense and shields, though he suffers from low attack and even lower hit rates in order to balance this out. Our next unit is Tenzin. He doesn't exactly have a proper Fire Emblem counterpart, but he's basically a grounded flyer or a Myrmidon with cavalry movement. High dodge, hit, and crit. You know, the basics. Up next is Kaya, our classic healer. And last is Lyn. I'd probably classify her as our axe fighter. She has a decently high attack, okay defense, and some great crowd control. Now, if you know Korra, you might realize this is a really weird lineup of units. First of all, Asami is missing. Something that disappointed me greatly. I mean, not only are we missing one of my favorite characters, but she's a 4th of the main team on this show. Then again, she got kind of ignored a bit outside of a love triangle in the first 2 books. She only got her justice in, book 3, hence why I'll eternally love it as my favorite season. We're also missing another person from one of these groupings, though. In books 2 and 3, Kaya, Tenzin, and Bumi were all together as a trio of siblings. However, we're missing someone from this trio in the game, that being Bumi. And you'll notice one similarity between these missing characters. Both of them are non-benders. From what I can understand, the devs probably didn't want to try and figure out how to code in player-controlled non-benders. And while I am upset about this, I also get why. Because there came one major benefit with their focus on the handful of benders they provided us with. See, We get a level of customization I never expected in this game. Every couple of levels, we're given a choice of how we want to improve our characters. There will be 2 options to choose between. What you choose will remain a permanent part of your unit, while the other option will be permanently forgotten. This is a level of customization I adore. By having choices like these, no 2 playthroughs will be exactly the same, allowing for a decent level of replayability. Maybe in one playthrough you go for maxing out Mako's power, while in another you max out Mako's ability to land powerful crits. And it's something I never expected to see in this game. Honestly, this is an interesting decision as compared to having different advanced classes to choose from. And I really love how many times you get these options. It creates a high level of customization that would seem kind of cool in a more competent turn-based strategy game. Like, imagine having different units that you have further specialized for various situations. However, that's about as far as my praise goes for the gameplay. As much fun as I found the gameplay to be, it gets really annoying really fast. The devs clearly didn't have enough time to properly balance the game, so there are times when the game feels way harder than is strictly necessary. See, for some reason, they decided the best way to balance things out is by giving the enemy way too much HP and very low power. As a result, the enemy does pitiful damage to you, while you doing something like 50 damage is just a scratch from their massive health bars. And this isn't some gradual build-up. No, before we even get our 4th party member, we start dealing with enemies who have 50 plus HP, and let me tell you, that's more HP than any of our party members will ever have, even at max level. As for the final boss, I hope you enjoy whittling away all 700 points of his health. Oh, wait, sorry, that's just his 2nd form. We have to include his first phase's 500 health for a nice and balanced total of 1200 HP. Suffice to say, I don't like this decision, and it puts the game balance all out of whack. If it wasn't clear earlier with the state of the elemental square, a lot of the gameplay balancing here is a band-aid fix after band-aid fix. These feel like the first ideas they had for fixes in the design room, and they probably had to simply settle on them due to their deadline. And once we get even later in the game, we run into dark spirits. The idea behind dark spirits is pretty interesting on paper. Without spirit bending, they'll return from defeat after 3 turns. However, this falls apart in practice. Our very first chapter involving dark spirits requires that we defeat all of them in order to win, which means every enemy on this map needs to be defeated within 3 turns of each other. This sucks. And as dark spirits show up more and more often in the game, it becomes less fun to interact with combat. See, before this chapter, I had fun interacting with the optional objectives of each map. Most of the time, one of these objectives would be something like defeat all enemies. But the moment dark spirits showed up, I stopped interacting with these optional challenges. So yeah, the gameplay is fun, but it starts falling apart if you interact with it for more than the first couple of maps. And these cut corners show up in more than just the gameplay. It also becomes apparent in the visual element of the game. First of all, let's look at the stats screen. I have quite a few issues with this thing, but the first one I noticed is that they don't tell us our movement stat. It would be really nice to know what unit movement is, and I know character movement changes. I noticed while playing that Tenzin's movement stat increased at one point after leveling up. Not because the UI outright told me, but because I noticed he could move a bit farther. Same applies to things like what each of the stats do. There's no outright explanation of what power, defense, or agility does. Power and defense are self-explanatory, but someone who hasn't played a strategy RPG may not realize what agility does. Hell, even I didn't know until an ability option essentially explained it to me. Another issue is with the ability explanations themselves. See, you can select attack skills on the bottom screen in order to see their stats. However, the same formality is not extended to passive skills. I learned this because both Kaya and Lynn joined the party with passive skills unlocked, and I was interested in knowing what these do, but the game wouldn't let me know. The last thing I noticed with the stats screen is the art. See, every character has a portrait on their stat screen. The first thing I noticed was that Korra, Mako, Bolin, and Tenzin seemed to be using the official art from the first season of the show. However, Kaya and Lynn seemed to be using some weird portraits. Lynn stuck out to me as being her outfit she wore while in the South Pole. And then I saw some of the enemy portraits, like the waterbender thug, who seems suspiciously like that one guy Korra fought in the very first episode of the show. Like he was photoshopped out of a frame of the show. This isn't even the tip of the iceberg, though. Say hi to the cutscenes.
I'm waiting for, like, the one cutscene that, like, caught me off guard. Oh, I don't know who you are or what you want, old man, but you're not getting it from me! She says.
Just imagine getting, like, completely curb stomped by someone who's looking at you like this, 24/7.
Imagine getting curb stomped by the TBH creature! Whoa, old man disappeared! What?
He turned into a stretchy PNG!
Oh no, the 5 FPS animation! This is where all the space went!
That's just how it works. There she goes!
There she goes! There are too many! What?
Oh.
This feels like a kid messing with MS Paint for the first time. I guess we'll have to deal with these guys. We'll have to deal with these guys for— What? What? I'm afraid so. You need to relearn. Oh my god, help.
Hello?
My family!
It seems pretty clear to me that they took stills from the show, alongside various pre-existing art assets, to make up the sprites in this game. And this isn't actually unique to just the art, but also the music. I didn't notice this at first, but once I started rewatching Book 1 of Korra, I noticed something. For the first time in my life, the music in a fight scene stuck out to me in the show, but like, in a weird way. When I got to the fight with Hiroshi Sato in episode 7, the music sounded familiar, and upon pausing and listening carefully, I realized that the music here played in the Dark Spirits chapter of the video game. Now, I'm not saying this is necessarily a bad thing. Reusing assets is completely acceptable. But when your assets wildly vary in quality, then the use of said assets becomes extremely noticeable. For example, I quickly realized all the music seemed to be like 20-second loops of music. I didn't necessarily care at first because the music wasn't offensive, and I even enjoyed some of it. However, it became extremely noticeable when some of the music was irritating on the mind. I mean, there was one track that made it sound like someone was getting a barrage of phone calls while left on silent. And then there's that one track that definitely wasn't made to loop. Like, it's extremely obvious and you're stuck listening to it forever. Though I should add that there are some cool assets that are used as well, like when Korra relearns her bending abilities. Now, these images aren't necessarily from the show, but I feel like I remember seeing them on the website. And this variance in quality also appears in the original art done just for this game. And let me start off with the map sprites. I enjoy these. No notes from me here. However, what I'm really interested in talking about are the 3D battle models. They look kind of bad. It's your opinion whether or not they seem passable. However, I'm trying to figure out whether or not Kaya's hair has too many or too few polygons. But whatever the case is, it's super unsettling. The general consensus with these models is that the longer you look at them, the worse they get. As for animations, they're something.
What the fuck?
Those weren't spikes.
A lot of them look really stupid, but I can tell some level of love and care was put into these animations. Like, I love the chi blocker attack, both the version for when the attack hits or misses. And there are other attacks I think are kind of fun. There is one that confuses me though, and that's Lynn's metal fists. I know this was probably done because it's easier to animate, but man, it would have been so cool to see her use those wrist swords as her basic attack. All of this combines into what I would call a horrible case of mediocrity. The game is playable and has some cool ideas, but a lack of resources prevents the game from being the best it could. If it had a bit more time in the oven, I feel like it truly could have been a fun and interesting game. Like, licensed games don't need to be bad. I know there are plenty of bad ones out there, but there are also some cool and fun ones that exist, and I truly do think this concept could have worked well. I mean, I probably would have made a few changes to help improve it. First of all, the weapon triangle situation would have had to be better balanced, probably something more akin to how the weapon triangle works in one of the Fire Emblem games. Maybe something like the break mechanic in Engage would have worked well with what this game was going for. As for units, my first priority would be adding Asami, because, you know, she's an important part of Team Avatar. And I love her, and honestly, non-benders can be some of the coolest characters in the shows. And assuming my version of this game has the time and money to have a story, I probably wouldn't want to set it in between books 2 and 3. I know this game released while book 4 was airing, but now that we have a complete series, there's more to choose from. A safe bet would obviously be to just have the game follow the plot of the show, maybe pick a specific season or 2 to follow. If the game has to take place outside of a given season though, I'd rather have it take place between books 1 and 3, or 3 and 4. Going between the first 2 books would allow for a story about cleaning up remaining Equalists, and if I remember, there's a decent amount of time between these seasons, unlike the 2 weeks between books 2 and 3. As for putting something between books 3 and 4, it could be an interesting idea, especially considering it's a whole 3 years that involve a kingdom in disarray. However, it would mean the team you have wouldn't contain Team Avatar, not with Korra out of commission and the team temporarily disbanded. You could also make an original story taking place after the show, or just take this concept to create an Avatar strategy game with completely original characters and their own whole dealio. like Pokemon Conquest or something. All my other issues with this game could likely be fixed with proper time and resources. This game idea has promise. I wish I could have hated it or felt completely indifferent, but in the end, I have a soft spot for it. I truly did find some joy in playing this game. I would never recommend it to any sane person, but it's certainly an experience to be had, and I'm glad I had it. I don't plan on playing this game again, though, and nor do I plan on making another video like this. If you guys are actually interested in hearing my thoughts or opinions on games like this in the future, though, let me know. I honestly feel way out of my depth here. Next time I see y'all, it'll be with another one of my stupid challenges.